We're going to talk about biomarker policy legislation that's in front of the New York Legislature, how biomarkers applies to cancer, rare disease. There are a host of uses for biomarkers and biomarker testing. And so this is part of the process of hopefully making it more widely included. I'd like to welcome Michael Davoli and the panel. And Michael is with an American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, ACF-CAN, as most of you know it. He's the Senior Director of Government Relations, and he is moderating our panel today. I will turn it over to Michael and let the panelists get settled.
Hello. Oh, wonderful. I'm going to say that about 20 times. So why don't we go and get started? So I know our good doctor here is actually on a very tight time schedule. So why don't we sort of jump right into this? But he'll be joining us. Why don't we start off? So first of all, my name is Michael Davoli. I'm the Senior Director of Government Relations for the American Cancer and Cancer Action Network, ACS-CAN, which is a huge mouthful. So I'm just going to say ACS-CAN. We're the advocacy affiliate of the American Cancer Society. So why don't we start off? Luke, if you would like to introduce yourself, and we'll go right down the line here.
Yes. Oh, hi. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you to your bio. Oh, that was awesome. I'm so inspired. Keep going. Well, I'm the founder of KIF1A.org. We started out in 2016, soon after my daughter, Susanna, was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition, her KIF1A gene. And at the time, we found maybe 12 people in literature in the world who had this condition, and we set out to find more people and to ultimately, drive research, find treatments, and ultimately make cure. So I do a lot of things, but that is what I'm here for, I think. And also to celebrate college events. Thank you all.
Super reason to be here. I'm Nick Rohs. I'm a thoracic medical oncologist at Mount Sinai, which is a fancy way of saying I'm a lung cancer specialist. And thank you to NewYorkBIO for inviting me. This is something that is near and dear to my heart, biomarkers and making sure that patients get precision world-class medicine. So I'm happy to talk about that today. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and thanks for having me. I am Jovia, Radix, Senior Vice President for Corporate Legislation at Consider LLC. We are a New York City-based lobbying firm. Actually, we've been lobbyists for the American Cancer Society for quite a long time. I've been there for about 5 years, and I know that lobbyists will not be right for most, but I hope that I leave everybody realizes why you should be your own lobbyist.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and so why don't we, getting started, the goal of this panel is to really kind of talk about patient engagement around a public policy issue. And, this panel, if you think about it, it kind of captures the full spectrum. You've got your patient, you have your doctor, and you have your full-time advocate. Now, together, those three things really are how the American Cancer Society goes about in its advocacy work, how we go about advocating on behalf of patients through public policy change. We run the full gamut, obviously, the American Cancer Society, everything from providing sort of support services to patients in treatment and guidance on treatment, but also leading the fight in the oncology space when it comes to public policy to improve access to cures, to improve access to screening, to improve access to the best research possible. Because what we've learned over the years is many of the most important decisions in the life of a cancer patient are not made sitting around your doctor's office or not made sitting around your kitchen table. They're made in the halls of government. And so all three of these voices are how we sort of advocate that public policy change. Sorry. So why don't we get into this? We've mentioned a little bit about biomarker testing. Now, let's level set here. Dr. Rohs, can you tell us what biomarkers are to start?
So, that's a very complicated answer to a simple question that I'm going to give you. But, like I say in my clinic, lung cancer is one word for many different diseases. Biomarker is actually a very broad term. So biology, marker, something we're looking for. And essentially, it's a measurable thing that is presented in a disease state that we can use to help inform care. So a biomarker could be something as simple as a blood pressure. it could be a chest X-ray. But often in my day-to-day work, I think of things like protein expressions and genetic changes as biomarkers in the cancer space. So biomarkers I use from start to finish in my clinic and how I take care of my patients. Biomarkers can help me screen for a disease state and help predict its eventual growth and progression, so we can find it early. A biomarker can help me inform the right decision up front for a patient. A biomarker could help me to decide what to do next for a patient for their treatment, or if they even deserve more treatment in that situation. So, we've always talked, when I talk with other experts in the cancer space, what do we want? What is the next need? And it always comes down to biomarkers, and biomarkers help us predict what to do best for that specific patient. And the nice thing about biomarkers is they're often individualized. It is your biomarker, not a broad biomarker. We have to base this off of a general population, but we look at your biomarkers in your situation and make the right decision for you. So it really is quite complicated, but in the end, it's driving toward precision medicine, personalized medicine, and the right treatment for you in your life.
Thank you. Now, can you give us some specific examples of the type of biomarkers that are sort of commonly being used in different forms of cancer, and what is something that is really not?
So, I always go to my passion of lung cancer. So look at genetic changes in tumors, genetic changes in EGFR, ALK, KRAS, BRAF. There are different changes in the tumor that may help me predict if they would respond to therapy. And a pill. The other really important thing is I'm not just looking for the right treatment, I'm avoiding the wrong treatment. That patients who have an actionable mutation like EGFR don't respond as well to immunotherapy. So it helps me get to the right therapy, but also avoid the wrong therapy. And then another kind of important biomarker that I think is critical in our clinic is what we call ctDNA, or circulating tumor DNA, where tumors shed information into the blood. And with a simple blood test, we can often find that information to help inform these decisions of screening, of these genetic changes, but also after a patient has a definitive procedure like surgery or chemoradiation to hopefully cure their disease, maybe we're able to find if they have residual disease and then
So backing up for a second, how does biomarker testing differ from genetic?
So biomarker, genetic testing does fall under biomarker testing in my model. So a genetic test, it depends on what we mean by genetic test. Are we looking at an entire human genome, germline mutations that you may get from mom and dad? That's actually not what I talk about in my clinic, because these are changes that actually happen in the tumor itself that cause it to grow. But in breast cancer, we do look at things like BRCA mutations that are potentially inheritable. So it can be a germline mutation. But again, biomarker is a very broad umbrella for many different types of tests.
And speaking of different types of tests, there's also different types of chronic disease and illnesses, right, that are impacted by biomarker testing. So it's not just the oncology space, correct?
Absolutely. Biomarkers are pan medicine. These are things that can inform our decisions about diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment. So, of course, I always go back to my safe space of oncology that I know very well, but biomarkers are used all over the place and are super critical for making best patient care decisions.
So shifting over to Luke, I know sitting here with the doctor, what are you thinking about? You are a father, you are a cancer survivor in remission, correct? I want you to share your story. Yes, I want to make sure I get it accurate. But you're a dad of a daughter, correct, that is living with rare disease. So what does this mean to you? What's going through your head right now as you're hearing the doctor talk about this? And what does the sort of biomarker testing mean to you?
Yeah, such a great question, and thanks for such a great answer. Just for some context, I had very late stage 3 colon cancer 2 years ago, and underwent about 18 months of chemotherapy, and knock on wood, I'm in remission right now. And I didn't tell many people. It was during COVID, so we were working home. We everything. I told Amber Free, who you'll meet later, who goes back to what Calvin was talking about, having a community, right? But the reason I didn't tell too many people is because there was one patient and one disease that I was very focused on, daughters. And sitting here thinking about biomarkers, listen to you, I think biomarkers are important to me for two reasons, right? They're important to the community for several, but for me, it's diagnostics and surveillance, right? So we, for diagnostics, imagine my daughter's trial right now, and I keep thinking, wow, if we had only identified her disease when she was 2 instead of, or when she was, even in the womb instead of when she was 2 or 3, things would be completely different right now. And I liken it to, I'm also a firefighter in our small town in Long Island, and I liken it to, I always make analogies with either baseball or fire, so I'll use fire right now. And if we pull up to a house and there's a lot of flames coming out of one window in a room, and we know there's a victim probably dying and burning in that room, we have to look at and assess the situation. We don't just jump into that room and try and pull somebody out, right? Fire, as all of you chemists and folks know, feeds and brines, right? So what we do is we go around the house to the other side of where that room is, outside of windows or cutting down walls. And then the fire moves, the flow path of fire moves from that room where that person is dying or burning, and the fire moves back to where the oxygen is. It quite literally moves rooms, and then we put ladder to help people, right? So imagine if we knew immediately where every window and every breakable wall was before the fire even started. Fire was that big, right? We could vent the house early, and the fire would come out the back door before that person even was born or even was burned, right? So I think of biomarkers as a way to identify something before it becomes out of control. For me, that's the diagnostic part, right? Is really being able to identify and assess a problem, and it's sort of foreshadowing, right? So I can see that right now with my daughter, we're studying EEG as biomarker, right? So we know that there's a certain EEG signature that everybody with her genetic disease has, and we are right now, you have to, there's a big difference between the word standard and valid, right? Everything standardized to make it through the regulatory pathway. And so, you have to have the same epileptologist reading every single EEG. So it's quite a task, right, to keep something standard. And, we forget about going out and trying to get raw EEG data, right? That's not possible. But we do it, and we try to see that when someone has a seizure and they go in to get, an EEG, there's a rare type of epilepsy that our hope is that, a neurologist like that might be KIP1A, right? And so we're able to diagnose these earlier. That's a big part of biomarkers for me. Now, shifting from my daughter, which I never like to do, but I will because my president of the company I'm keeping here and I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by. I think this is a horrible part of cancer, is that I live in constant anxiety, right? When I was told that I had cancer, I thought I was going to die. And the first thing that went through my head was, who's going to continue to drive research for my daughter, right? And then things unfolded, and I had chemotherapy, and I came out on the other end. But I still have to have scans, blood work, and everything every 3 months, and now every 6 months. And that interim time is horrifying. You think that it's just constant. And so the surveillance part of things can get much better, I think. And for me, what is a great surveillance tool is just what the doctor was talking about, is ctDNA, right? So ctDNA is something that I mentioned it yesterday. I can't quite tell if it's quantitative or qualitative, but what I can tell is it says, yes, there's no circulating tumor in your blood, right? So that's the first thing that says, okay, deep breath. And then scans, okay, deep breath. So it's this kind of cookie cutter thing that everyone's going through. So if there's more precision biomarkers of cancer, I think we'll be able to kind of hopefully eliminate that really life-changing and negatively impactful surveillance stage of living scan to scan and so those are the two most important things being biomarkers.
So look, you kind of hit upon my next question there was about sort of tell us about your journey from being, like how you became an advocate, how you started really speaking your voice there. And you touched on this a little bit, but just tell us a little bit about your journey as, to become an advocate, because not everyone gets a diagnosis or is the parent of a child with a diagnosis and then suddenly winds up on a stage like this as an expert. I mean, if I didn't know better, I would have thought you had a doc, you had your MD based on your knowledge. So how did you become that advocate for your voice and for your family?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it ended up, it evolved from my family to our community, right? And Amber over there, I'll point out, yeah, somebody when I got sick, I did confide in Amber, and she did send me things at home, but knowing that to make me comfortable, knowing that there was one focus. But me, it was very clear marching orders, right? We didn't have, but Susanna was the first, person in clinic who we could really identify. I had very clear marching orders from our physician. When they told us there was no treatment and no cure, I said, well, that can't be. What do we do? And she said, go find 100 kids. So we go find 100 kids and get a clinical picture of disease, right? And that was pretty clear, and we didn't set out to start a foundation. We set out to find 100 kids. Those of you who might have heard me speak before, I tell this story a lot, is that the best thing we did was go and put KIP1A on every single panel that we possibly could. So if somebody had a seizure or somebody walked in to their doctor and said, I'm having trouble with vision or moving, savvy enough doctor, they'll order a epilepsy panel or a movement disorder panel or whatever. And so we made sure that KIP1A was on all of those panels. We started finding people who had this genetic condition who thought they were living with cerebral palsy or something else, often Rett syndrome, right? Shout out to Rett. And a big congratulations on last week's approval. Yeah, and so a father called me and said, hey, my daughter was just diagnosed. We got a website, and I had the genetic testing companies have my phone number. So if anybody has a KIP1A diagnosis that you've got, give them my information. And this guy called me and said, my daughter just got this diagnosis. I said, well, have you read the one clinical paper? There was one clinical paper out there that was terrifying. It just said, mutations in KIP1A cause brain atrophy and early death. It was a terrifying paper to read. And he said, no, I couldn't afford the $35 on PubMed. I thought, everybody's got the right to learn about their disease. That is just horrific that, we need to change that. So that's when the foundation started. That's when we started advocating to be law. And we uploaded every single PDF that had anything to do with KIP1A, either basic research and understanding to that clinical paper, put it on the website, and people started getting the diagnosis, reading the paper, and reaching out, and we started the foundation. And that's how we became advocates, really advocating for right genetic testing, because that still is really existing, and a strong community, right? So you're not alone out there, right? I will say that the people in this room, both, when I say the patient community, it's not just patients or caregivers, it's the scientific community, the research community, the clinical community, right? The biotech community, we're all in this together. And that became advocating for more than just my daughter. It became advocating for a stronger and more people with a significant amount of skill sets that could help. I got really good at asking for help, right? And then we had this army of people behind us. So we all of a sudden galvanized this community. I'd like to take the word rare disease, right? Because, individually KIP1A is rare, but collectively we're not rare, right? So we have this collective sort of goal and mission, and that's to, forge discovery, create relationships, and hopefully have validated biomarker studies that will help us identify and understand more people, and also relieve the stress of going scan to scan. So it's something like that for me. And that's how we started advocating. And then all of a sudden, everybody in the community has a skill set that can be really done. So whenever we get a new family that joins us, first thing I say to them is, you're not alone and we need you, right? And so, what the most valuable thing is when we had our last in-person conference, 2019, if you can activate people, then you're doing your job as an advocate, right? And we had a guy who's a high school bus driver. Do you know how much money we saved as a foundation having a bus driver who was qualified to shuttle people back and forth from the hotel to the conference? Every single person in the community has a skill set they can lean on. So it's about finding that skill set and really making it applicable to that mission of any foundation.
So shifting gears a little bit. So Doctor, I often hear about everyone criticizes insurance companies, right? That's like boogeyman on many, many different levels. How do insurance regulations, insurance rules directly impact access to biomarker tests?
So first I'll say about access to research papers. Every person who publishes an article is happy to share it. The primary author, email them, they would love to share their work with you. And it's all free from them. So if you ever have an article you want to find, go to the corresponding author, send them an email, you'll probably have it within 24 hours. As far as access to biomarker testing, unfortunately, insurance companies' job is to save money. That is what their job is. Their job is to be financially responsible in their own little world of their organization. My job is to get a patient to the best care possible. And unfortunately, like we were talking about standardization and everything, they want to have a validated, standardized test, and I absolutely appreciate that. We want to have good tests. We want to have reliable tests that can give us good information. But unfortunately, they don't keep up with the pace of discovery. I cannot keep up with my own subspecialization. It is evolving so quickly in a good way that they are not able to keep up with new approvals and standard of care that I think is standard of care because I'm keeping up to date on all the newest stuff. So to give you an example, we now have shown in lung cancer that giving immunotherapy before surgery, often in combination with chemotherapy, is incredibly beneficial for a certain subpopulation of patients, generally who do not have a genetic driver mutation, in particular that they have that high immune score I talked about before. I don't know who that patient population is unless I get my biomarkers. Most companies are not approving that test before surgery because they're not an advanced cancer patient where it is currently approved and pretty well. Even in that setting, sometimes I have to fight for it and make sure I prove my diagnosis and the need for it. And then, so I can't inform best treatment decisions. So I'm constantly having to fight and spend time writing letters, phone calls. And it's really a very poor use of anybody's time, particularly when I'm supposed to be focusing on my patients. So it's really frustrating to not be able to get that information. And then for evolving technologies like surveillance with circulating tumor DNA or predictive tests, unfortunately, again, they want lots and lots of data built up to get this done, but we've already shown in so many small subsets of data how valuable this can be. So it's frustrating to have to go through all these hoops to get to the appropriate biomarker testing for our patients and to be able to access them easily. We have electronic medical records that should be shared among everybody, but unfortunately, when we had the mandate to roll out electronic medical records, nobody mandated that they had to talk to each other. So if you go to one hospital system, another hospital system, I have to beg, borrow, and plead to get that information from somebody else. Or if it's from a private company, then you have to upload it to your portal, but that can't go directly into your medical record because there's a whole legal thing. So then it has to be faxed to you. Who's using faxes in 2023? I am. As your medical doctor, I'm using faxes. So that's just ridiculous to me. There's patient portals and everything, but it's so many barriers to getting this information, to getting the right tests. And another really important example to me is I see a patient in the hospital. I rounded in the hospital this morning, new cancer diagnosis. It's terrible. I don't have a tissue biopsy yet. I have not proven on paper that this is a cancer diagnosis. I'm sorry, I know this is a cancer diagnosis. Nothing else does this. This is what I do for a living. This is cancer until, 99.999%, I'm not proven wrong. I want to send a liquid biopsy on the patient because I know that that's a valuable thing. I can't do that in a hospital. So that's, a real problem to me. I can't do that for weeks after hospitalization. And that test can come back in 7 days. Instead of me getting a patient biopsy, sending the tissue off to a company, getting it back, that could take 3 to 4 weeks. I can have that answer in a week, but I'm not allowed to send that test because I'm not going to get covered by insurance. And that is just devastating to me.
The importance of home phlebotomy.
Home phlebotomy, but also that patient may be in the hospital for another week while we're controlling their pain, getting their bowels moving, getting them mobile, or maybe they're going to a nursing facility. Nursing facilities, all of a sudden there's another issue of crossing boundaries that, doesn't need to happen. It's a fake barrier that shouldn't exist.
So we've all agreed the insurance companies are part of the problem, or they're a huge part of the problem. Someone laughing, but when it comes to addressing this, one of the things I'm going to sort of pivot to my soapbox for a moment, and I'm going to bring my colleague Jovia. I have to say, Jovia is, we've not forgotten, Jovia is one of the #1 lobbyists in the entire city of New York, advocating on behalf of patients and advocates. So we're honored to have her here with us. We are working on legislation at the state level in New York State and around the country that would require insurance companies to cover all state regulated insurance plans, including Medicaid, to cover comprehensive biomarker testing. And that's the key. The key word is comprehensive. So we don't want just a single panel test where a doctor does a test for one biomarker, ships it off, and then has to come back and do another test, another. We want comprehensive testing. The problem is we have to get it through the legislature. So from Jovia, from your experience working with clients, working with the legislative space on all sorts of different issues, I've worked with Jovia on many different issues. What is it that lawmakers sort of need to hear in order to get them to move? Is it my voice? Is it statistics? Like, what's your piece of advice for any advocate who's trying to convince a lawmaker to sort of get on their side and do something?
I say this to my clients all the time. I am an intermediary. Like, my job is to put you in front of a lawmaker. I can tell your story, but it's not as powerful as this coming from you, right? Coming from you as the doctor who's going through this every day. The fact is, they're lawmakers, right? They specialize in being politicians, right? Every day. And I mean, for better or for worse, that is their job. They are not doctors. They're not patients. They're not subject matter experts. So what you have to do is put subject matter experts in front of them. The reason that bills get written and they leave out things like, yes, we're going to do e-medicals, but they don't speak to each other, is because they don't know that they have to speak to each other. All they know is the e-medical part is a problem and that their constituents have raised it as an issue and they need to fix that issue and say that they did it. But they don't know that once they fix the issue, it brings on all of these other unintended consequences, right? So what I always say is you need to get a couple of people in front of them. They need to hear from their own constituency. They need to hear from parents, from children, from sisters, from brothers, and not just one or two. Like how you say you found a group of people, they need a group too. Because unfortunately, what happens is they get one-offs all the time. One person has an issue. It's like something's happening in the district, and one person says, "My car fell in this pothole and I got a flat tire." That one flat tire is not forcing the city to move in and pave that street. If 4 or 5 people then start writing the office and calling the office every day and saying, "I don't know about you guys, but now we've had 6 cars in this block," all of a sudden it starts to become an issue, right? And that is unfortunately how they operate. The issues that get done the fastest are the issues that have the loudest group of people behind them, but also are the issues that have the most money behind them. We will not be deluded to think that industries as big as the insurance companies industries do not employ lobbyists. They do, right? That's why I say everyone says lobbyist is a bad word, but advocates should have lobbyists as well, right? Because they have an intermediary. They have someone who says to an elected official who they've been working with now because they've been in these jobs for a very long time, for decades. They have someone there. The state legislature has no term limit. We have assemblymen and senators who've been in the state legislature for 20 to 30 years. I mean, since I was a child, some of them, and a little bit on my background, my mother is a judge in New York City and she ran for office in 2001. There are elected officials now in the legislature that ran with her in 2001 that I know because I met them when they were running in 2001. I was 15 years old. I was in high school. I never thought that this would be my profession then, right? But some of the lobbyists that were lobbying them in 2001 are still lobbyists today. And those are the lobbyists that are sought out by big industries naturally because they have the relationships. But I will tell you this, the legislature is changing. And it is changing dramatically, right? And it changed dramatically because I think people really started to understand the power of their voice and the power of their vote. But the power of their voice is getting back to advocacy, what we need, right? Because you need to have multiple people in front of an elected official saying this is the issue. But also do your research. Which elected official do you need to talk to? Sometimes it's not your senator. Because sometimes your senator, your assembly person, the governor, it's not your one issue. But there may be a senator who has a family member suffering with the same issue, who is more dedicated to it than your person. Because sometimes what you need is an advocate within their own group, someone who is going to fight for what you want to fight for, because they've been there, right? They've had a parent, they've had a child, they've had a sister, and they went through the red tape and they understand that there are issues here, and they are more willing to spend time on those particular issues.
He just said so much. I was worried I could ask you a question. I have a question. I've asked Dimitri, Dimitri is incredible, a great advocate. I've asked him this question before. I feel like biotech and industry is like a herd, right? If there's one indication, then all of a sudden, everyone will go there, right? And I feel like, how do we get policymakers to do that, right? So, I mean, we're in the New York Genome Center right now. People know this more than me. How many states does Medicaid cover next generation sequencing? At last, like 5, 6, right? I think that's going to change the world when we get Medicaid to cover every state to cover it, right? How do we get lawmakers to say, "Oh, wow, that's working"? But for us, as soon as Michigan covered next generation sequencing, we had 18 new patients in 1 month, right? So how do we get lawmakers to sort of fall like dominoes and go with that?
They have to know, right? I am not going to tell you that every New York lawmaker reads the Michigan Times, right? And they get up in the morning and there's so much happening in this state. New York is a huge state. There's so much happening in New York that sometimes they don't have time to read what's going on in Michigan.
So that's our job as advocates.
Right. As an advocate, that's our job. It's our job to say, and Mike knows we do this all the time, this is happening in this state. Do you want New York to get left behind? New York loves to be first. Like, we love to be first. We love to be the premier state that did something, right? So you would be surprised how often it works to say, like, New York is behind Massachusetts right now in this, right? Like, Jersey did this 3 years ago, right? You would be surprised how quickly that makes New York start to go, wait a minute, what is happening? Especially if it's working, especially if it's benefiting people.
But I do find a particular barrier in New York State as far as biomedical approvals. Next generation sequencing for advanced cancer patients via liquid biopsy was approved in 49 other states. I spent a year filling out an exception form. There's actually a picture of me ripping it apart. I was so excited that they posted on the website because it was gone finally. I spent a year doing that in New York State, where we should have world-class healthcare. Manhattan is a hub of world-class medicine, and I had to be jumping over hoops for something that was every other state was doing. So it can be frustrating.
So the answer is, how do we scale that model to other diseases?
Yeah.
Cancer is so often an example.
So just sort of following up with this, is there a tactic approach that you think, like, if you've got, your focus, your goal was in your community, whether it's your advocacy, et cetera, is there a tactic or approach that that you advise clients to take on? If you have a limited amount of time, like, how are you going to go about trying to get to a lawmaker or influence?
I think the first thing you have to ask yourself is what is the ask, right? They have extremely short attention span, right? They're doing a lot in short spaces of time. They are passing billion-dollar budgets and they've got 2 months to do it, right? And these budgets are 400 pages long and somebody's got to read them. With that being said, what is the ask? What do you need from them? That's the first thing I ask any client who comes in. What is it that we are going in to ask for? Once we have the ask, then we can lay out the advocate. This is the ask. Now, which members of the assembly, the city council, the senate, which members are have advocated for this before? And if there are none that have advocated for it before, let's start to dig into districts where they may have a hospital that is the premier hospital in this particular biomarker research. If it is in someone's particular district, fine, let's do it. We at Kasira, as an example, last year helped with the expansion of the New York City Blood Center. The council member whose district it was in was very adamant that he did not need an expansion of any hospital because he had too many hospitals in his district. That sounds nuts. But it was a very affluent district, right? So the question is, who benefits from the New York City Blood Center? Black and brown people throughout the city, because they are the leading center in sickle cell anemia. So the people in his district, and I will not lie to you, the argument was if we build what they want to build, it will block the sun from the apartments in his district. We're talking about lives here, right? But he had gone around and said to all of his colleagues, I can't have another building in my district. The problem is we have something in the city council called deference. And if it's in your district and you say no, usually your colleagues will not vote against you because it's your district, although the entire council has to vote. Well, so then I said to the client, well, whose communities benefit from this, right? Like, it's not his community. Let's get real here. It is Brownsville, Brooklyn. It's the South Bronx. It's the North Shore, Staten Island. It is, and I have to say to one council member, I said, he asked you not to do this because he has too many hospitals in his district. Bellevue, NYU, what do you have in your district? You don't have a hospital. You don't have a hospital at all, much less a state-of-the-art one. You're asking people whose districts contain Woodhall, Kings County, and Interface, no offense to them, to not build a center that's going to save the lives of people in their district to transport blood. It doesn't make sense. And you can't allow deference to be the thing that says, because he says in his district, right? And it took us finding advocates elsewhere. It took us finding literal friends of council members who had sickle cell anemia, who went to the blood center, whose blood was stored there, who had to sit down and say to their friends, like, you can't let him do this. You don't understand what I go through. 4 days a week I go to get blood, and I have to drive across the city to get it. Other than that, we were in a place where this bill was just about dead on arrival because it was his district, it was his space, and he said no, right? So it's really important to have those people who can speak to what the need is, right? Because especially if it's not in your area of town, people don't understand it. They don't know. They don't know. Many people, even myself before I sat here today, asked me what a biomarker was. I don't know, right? I'm the daughter of a cancer survivor. I don't know what the biomarker is, right? It's just something I never had to experience. So believe me when I tell you they don't know. And not to any fault of your own, but that is the job of an advocate, right? That is our job. That's the job to say, I know you don't know what a biomarker is, but I need you to sit down and listen for 10 minutes as to what a biomarker is and have this conversation. I think the other thing is access. How do you find these people? That's important, right? Mike knows I stand outside of City Hall on the days where they are mandated to come to City Hall. Yeah. On the days where they're mandated to come to City Hall, I stand outside of City Hall for hours because it is easier for them to ignore an email than it is for them to ignore me when I am standing in front of them saying, hey, this is Michael Davoli from the American Cancer Society. Want to talk to me for a second? They don't want the reputation of saying you didn't stop for 2 minutes outside of City Hall to say hello, right? So they will listen. And usually that listen will get you a follow-up meeting where they will sit down on Zoom and listen to what your issue is because they've already met you. And they know that I will be here next month. Same spot, same space. And they don't want me to have to be here again.
I also think that, advocacy groups, why we're such a great tool, which we are, is because we don't have to operate within the same compliance guidelines as industry. I'm not a healthcare provider, HIPAA doesn't apply to me, right? And so how we galvanize and organize a community, honestly, we incentivize the out of our community to show up, right? If if we have a 95% response rate to this survey within 48 hours, everybody in our group who took the survey is going to get a $25 Amazon card. Can't do that in industry or the medical threat, but we can galvanize a community through the most practical means possible.
The other thing is you can tell people to show up at City Hall.
Yeah.
Stand up on the step.
So obviously, as you can tell, we could go on for hours. I just want to thank our panel, thank all of you for your input here, your experience. And I'm just going to say this, listen, this is my job. I'm paid to be an advocate. This is what I do for a living. Jovia job, this is what she does for a living. What lawmakers need to hear, they need to hear your voice. They need to hear the patient's voice. They need to hear the doctor's voices. You weren't an advocate for your daughter. Okay. When I was a kid, I had a medical condition. I still have a medical condition. My mother was my #1 advocate. If you can advocate for your child or yourself, you can advocate for the law. So we're going to wrap up here. Thank you all so much. And I'll just say this. If you are interested in learning more about our biomarker campaign in New York, we'll stop and talk to me after the session today. Happy to talk. Or go to fightcancer.org/NY, BioNY, and learn about our biomarker campaign here in New York. So thank you all so much.